Hello, everybody. We're here to talk about chapter 10, which is personality. Okay, so here are the objectives that we're going to meet today. Um, we are going to spend, a fair amount of time on the foundations of Freud, and I would like you to stick with it the best that you can, because there's a point to it, which we'll definitely talk about when we get there. Okay, personality. So, what is personality? Personality is the consistent and distinctive pattern of thoughts, feelings, behaviors of a person. But we'll see about that. So, as we go forward into exploring personality, we will have to think through whether consistent is really part of the mix. So, hang in there for that. All right. So, if you read this for yourself, you are an independent thinker, but you have a strong need to be liked and respected by others. At times, you're outgoing and extroverted, while at other times, you're reserved and introverted. You have found it unwise to be too frank in revealing yourself to others. While you have some personality weaknesses, you can generally compensate for them. You tend to be critical of yourself. You have a great deal of potential, but you have not yet fully harnessed it. Some of your aspirations are pretty unrealistic. So this appears in your book. And it's also a good example of a general horoscope, that sort of thing. If you look up your, star sign, you're very likely to see something a lot like that. So this is the graphic from the slide before. And here we're going to talk about distinctive pattern, right? So um, the paragraph that I just read to you represents a really general, very ambiguous set of statements. It says, you are this, but also you are sometimes that. And it basically does that for everything. And so anybody can see themselves in this paragraph. And the point that I want to make here is that this type of thing cannot describe your personality because it is not distinctive. It can apply to pretty much anybody. And when we're describing personality in whatever form, whether we're talking about traits or whatever, it has to be distinctive. We have to be talking about things that can be defined and separated from other aspects. Okay, so what shapes personality? And here, really what we're talking about is another instance of nature and nurture, right? So, culture would be the nature part and nurture would be the evolutionary part. And we see this over and over and over again in psychology is this interaction between these two things. And, under culture here, we talk a little bit about individualistic cultures and collectivistic cultures because those cultural umbrellas really have a very strong impact on how our personalities come to develop. Um, the emphasis of the overall culture on what is important and what is encouraged and what is discouraged or considered unimportant really impacts us as our personality is in its most malleable state, which is when we're little. And it it's not to say that there are not plenty of people in individualistic cultures who have a more collectivistic type of personality structure or the reverse. That's not the point that I'm making. What I'm making is that it has a very strong impact. Um, the evolutionary process part of this, you have to think about how personality traits can influence your ability to procreate. And when you really boil it down to the most essential parts. You need to think about how the personality traits, whether they're, considered to be good or considered to be bad, are impacting your ability to make children. So for example, on the side here, I have, a guy holding a baby, and I have a little icon that represents connection between two people. And what I'm trying to represent here is that their personality traits that center around connection and kindness and that sort of thing that, represent opportunities to procreate, right? And here, what I'm trying what I'm trying to get across when you look at the guy with the tie and then the smiley face with hard eyes, is somebody who's very smooth, very suave. And the idea behind that is that those personality traits have a tendency to charm potential partners, right? So leading to more children. And on the kind of less a flattering side over here on the left side of the screen, you have people who are crankier, or people who are more vain, or people who are more competitive, and those also have a advantage, right? Because if you are super competitive, you're going to do whatever that you can to get the mate that you want instead of somebody else getting the mate that you want. And, if you're a very aggressive person, you can procreate in lots of different ways by being an aggressive person, either by pushing competitors out of the way, fighting them, or by being directly aggressive with a potential mate, right? So, evolutionarily speaking, there are definitely impacts of your personality. So, what shapes the personality? And there, again, we've seen this type of thing before, and we have to talk about how um your nervous system and your brain activity play into how you perceive events around you and how you kind of translate them into memories and experiences that then go forward to influence your personality development, right? So if you're very aroused, if you're very activated and your cortisol is kind of pumping and you're going to experience an event more probably with more stress than maybe another person who is not as aroused. If your amygdala, for example, in your brain is activated, then probably you're going to have a different response than somebody who is less activated in that way. The point that I'm trying to make is your brain chemistry absolutely impacts how your personality develops and how your behavior influences, the people around you, right? So it's not just your own physiology, it's other people's physiology coming in to influence you. And that kind of plays into the environmental factors, right? So our social interactions form our responses, which in turn form and influence our nervous system arousal and our brain activity. All of these things work together in kind of, an endless feedback loop, right? So you can't pull out one from the others. They all influence each other. And it's really important to remember that. And it's really important to remember that if you want to influence somebody, you can do it a number of different ways, right? It's really helpful in some ways that all of these things are connected, because if you want to change something, you have multiple points of entry to do that. All right. So, on to some theories. First, we cannot talk about personality without talking about Freud. So, the psychoanalytic perspective, Freud had his own issues. He definitely had um problems with interpersonal relationships, like for example, we're going to talk about some of the theorists that he worked with in a few slides, but in general, his relationships with other professionals did not end well. And we'll talk about that when we get there, but he had his own issues professionally, he had his own issues personally with family members. He was not perfect, right? And he had some interesting ideas, but the point of a theory is that we can test it. And many of his theories were not possible to test. There was just no way to do that. And so, interesting idea or not, if we can't test it, we can't go forward with it as a part of lasting psychology. That being said, you know, Freud continues on in the zeitgeist, right? He represents this sort of cornerstone of psychology. And we'll talk about why that is very shortly, but we cannot skip Freud when we talk about psychology in general, and certainly not when we talk about personality, because he is such a cornerstone. So why is Freud such a thing? Why does he continue to be part of cultural knowledge? And the reason why is this, right? Like this is actually a really nice depiction of how Freud saw the mind. And it has two parts to it, which we'll discuss on slides that are coming. But the point that I want to make here is that this unconscious part, the preconscious mind and the unconscious mind, they represent something that was completely new, just completely and totally new in society. People had no concept that there was anything going on in our heads that was not at the surface. So what are these things? So the conscious mind, I think, feels pretty obvious to us that it's a pretty small part of our mind, right? But we're aware of what's going on in our conscious mind. We know what's going on. This is our stream of consciousness. This is our thoughts. Um, the pre-conscious mind is the things that are just like kind of right beneath the surface, but that we're not thinking about in that exact moment. So if I said like, tell me about your mother, you could pull that right out of your pre-conscious mind because it's right there. It would not be very difficult to go in there and find it. Um, Similarly, I could say, tell me what you had for dinner, or, like, what are you doing tomorrow? That's all stuff that's in your pre-conscious mind. But probably not in your conscious mind because you're listening to the lecture, right? Hopefully you are in the lecture and you're thinking about these concepts. And so that kind of like a train of thought that you're on is not about your mother or about, what you're doing tomorrow or what dinner was or any of that stuff. It's about what I'm talking about right now, right? And whatever else you're doing, right? So the unconscious mind is the part that we're going to talk about on the next slide. This the kind of blue part, what's in the ocean here. And the unconscious mind is driven by um, you know, all these things that we can't perceive directly, but that influence how we behave and how we are in the world and our personality structure. So what are those things? So the id, okay, is these are basic drives. So, when a baby is born, they are basically all id, right? Like a baby is all about what they need in that exact moment. They don't really have any concept of what came before. They don't have any concept of what came after. All that they know is that they're hungry or tired or pooping or whatever it is, right? It's all about the immediate need. If you have a need, you cry and then you get it met. That's it. The ego is the part of the personality that starts to develop when we learn that we can't always get everything that we want exactly when we want it delivered on a plate, right? So, if you think about when this starts to develop, it is the part of us that is able to wait for a candy bar, right? When we're kids for a few minutes or whatever, or that allows us to really think through, like, all right, I have this need. How am I going to get this met? Because screaming and crying for it, like I did when I was a baby, is not acceptable. Right. So, my 5-year-old is really working on the development of her ego, right? She can do that. She can ask for things, instead of screaming and grabbing them and running away, right? Which is what the id would do. So, your super ego is not just concerned with what is acceptable, but it's really about what is the right thing to do. The super ego part of your personality is going to tell you what is moral and what is immoral. So, you can get things lots of different ways, and some of them are not very honest, right? And so your super ego is there to say, like, oh, you sure you want to do it like that? It's kind of sitting on your shoulder and putting a moral compass on the things that you want to do. Okay, so defense mechanisms. I've put here some little summaries in the purple for defense mechanisms. These are in your book and they explain the things in your book. You can think of examples for defense mechanisms. The kind of rationalization is one of the more complicated, pardon me, is one of the more complicated concepts on this slide. And this is the one where, that somebody is giving you a reason that is just not true, right? You can see that their reason for their behavior was clearly something different, but they're giving you something that meets their own justifications, right? And doesn't have really anything to do with what actually happened or what is correct or what is moral or anything like that. So that's one of the harder ones to understand. Um, a reaction formation, this is the one where you're seething over something and your response is to be overly sweet, right? That's your reaction formation. Um, you know, Displacement, it does say here discharging sexual or aggressive urges towards objects that are more acceptable. I'm not sure that I would be that specific about it. I think it's like just you can displace any kind of feeling onto from one place onto another. You can even displace positive ones, right? So like let's say you really like person A and they're best friends with person B, and you go to person B and you're very, very, very nice to them because person A won't give you the time of day, right? Like it it's not the correct target. You're just putting those feelings there because that's what you can do. Projection is something that we probably are all aware of. This is something that is very common in relationships, where, the other person says to you, you do this or that or the other thing, and you're like, what are you talking about? That's not me. That's what you do, right? So that person is projecting onto you, right? Regression, we're gonna kind of talk about sister concept to regression on the next slide. But it's not exactly the same. A regression is very literally going back to a behavior pattern and an emotional state from an earlier point of development. So, this would be like somebody who undergoes a trauma and they're an adult and then they go back to acting like a 4-year-old. So that's regression. Is that real? Oh, it's a different lecture, but that's what the defense mechanism is defined as. So that's almost all that you really need to know about Freud. But so fixation, I just want to talk about this for a second. So there's a little bit more that I just want to touch on just because it's so adjacent that I feel like we should definitely talk about it. So Freud has this concept of fixation, that you have this tendency to persist in pleasure-seeking behaviors associated with this earlier stage of development, where you just didn't resolve the conflicts. Now, I didn't talk to you at all about the psychosexual stages of Freud's development, just because A, it takes a lot of time, and B, I'm not sure how much I buy into it. But it's all in your book, obviously. But the point here is that, you're getting stuck in an earlier stage of development because something happened. And it turns out that there actually is something to that. It's not exactly the same. So remember where I said that Freud had some interesting ideas, but theories need to be testable. Well, so people do have a tendency to get stuck at a point where they experience trauma. So, if you have, and I'm talking here about very serious traumas. I'm talking about, being a victim of serious violence, witnessing, a traumatic event. So, like witnessing, a murder or whatever it is, right? Really serious traumas. So you can get stuck at that point, in your beliefs and your thoughts and your maturity. Absolutely. Um, oh, there's a typo on this slide, but you know, um, you can work through that. There is evidence that this is true, but it is also fixable. This is a therapeutic um, opportunity here. So, if you know somebody who has experienced a really serious trauma early on, and they are now adults and they have issues that they're not behaving appropriate to their age. For example, say they experienced a serious trauma when they were 2, and this is somebody who, now that they're 32, will have tantrums, will be triggered by something and just start screaming and crying and like just, flipping out. That's a really good example of this. So, that can be worked through, but this actually is a thing. We don't really call it fixation, but like it's a very related concept and one with an evidence base. Okay. So you remember how I said that Freud did not have super strong relationships himself, and it comes out very strongly here. So Adler and Jung were both proteges of Freud, and they spent a lot of time with him, and they had like very intense, professional relationships, really long conversations, long letters. And it was a very intense relationship. And what ended up happening was that both of those theorists went forward to basically say, here's my difference between my forming theory and your theory, and I wrote those on the slide, right? And it just all fell apart. Freud just decided he wasn't ever going to talk to them again because they had the audacity to have different theories. And that is a real problem, right? Because psychology as a field is, evolving. All scientific fields are evolving and constantly changing. And to simply reject the evolution of the field, which is what these folks represent, because they were a step on from where he was and he didn't agree with them, is not a good look in terms of, strong science, right? Horney, by the way, is certainly worth mentioning. She really believed that Freud's idea that um women's main issue was penis envy. She really thought that was kind of dumb. And that the issue was basically that um, you know, women were not treated equally. And a lot of the issues that they had stemmed from that. So, she was kind of a early feminist pioneer without even really knowing that. Okay. So theories about how personalities are formed and their structure, humanistic. So the humanistic perspective really centers around our innate personality, or sorry, our innate capacity for personal growth, right? And our ability to be in control of the choices that we make to move forward in life and to, formulate our own destiny, basically. And this sounds obvious to us now, but when this perspective was really developed, this was really new to people. Folks were very deep into Freud's ideas that, we're basically slaves to our unconscious, and we have no idea what we're doing or why we're doing it. And there's nothing really that we can do about it unless we go into analysis for, 7 days a week for 20 years. And so this was new, and it kind of the first step towards um like cognitive behavioral therapy comes almost directly out of the humanistic perspective, because it's basically about like thinking through what you are doing and thinking through what behaviors that you can do to make things different. Well, that comes directly from here. So, another part of humanistic theory is this concept of unconditional positive regard and conditional positive regard. And these concepts are not that difficult to understand as concepts. The unconditional positive regard is not that, I love everything that you do and you can do no wrong and there's no problems ever. And that's not what unconditional positive regard means. What it means is I love you no matter what you do. Not that I like everything that you do. And those two things are different, right? And if you're struggling to understand how those two things are different, then probably you did not grow up in a situation where you were surrounded by unconditional positive regard, which, an argument can be made as kind of like the core job of um, your parents. So conditional positive regard is when the love and the acceptance only comes when you do what is expected of you, right? If you step out of line, you are no longer in grace, right? If you step out of line, you're not loved, you don't feel loved, you're not given acceptance. And again, you don't have to love everything that somebody does in order to provide them with unconditional positive regard. It's just that the message is, listen, I might not love this thing, but I still love you no matter what. And in conditional positive regard, that's not the message, right? In conditional positive regard, the message is, I only love you if you do what I need you to do. So, oops, did I go backwards? I did. So, oops, I went too far. Okay. The bottom line here is that when we are raising children, and if we want them to be like emotionally healthy children who understand that the people around them are not kind of driven by the whims of, whatever's happening in the house that day, which is a very insecure place to be, and causes all sorts of problems for children. We need to make sure that we're communicating unconditional positive regard, right? There are many, many, many negative offshoots of, living in a home where it feels like love is conditional on behaving correctly, right? Okay, trait theories. So I want to start with trait theory by going back to that first slide where we're talking about what's stable, right? So, um, and what this slide is showing you is that stability is a little bit relative, and also that it increases for the most part over time. So as we are born and are very young, our personality is, set to a certain degree, right? This 0.35 number on the 0 to 2.9 line basically represents this idea that the personality traits that we're showing in that age range are stable about a third of the time. And the rest of the time they're changing, excuse me, they're changing, they're growing, they're modifying, you can be kind of, by this model, 2/3 a different person from one year to the next, right? And as we go forward, we become more stable in our personality traits as we go on. Um, I do not know exactly why we decrease in the stability of our traits between 60 and 73. I kind of chuckled when I saw that. I have a theory. I have absolutely no evidence for this, but when I was looking at this, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if that's because this is the period in which most people retire. And when you retire, you have an opportunity to like try new things and, go to different places and interact with different people. And maybe we kind of loosen up a little bit in order to accommodate those new people and experiences. Anyway, it's just a theory, but the point of this chart is that as we get older, our personality becomes more set. But but even at its most set, it's only 3/4 set, right? There is always room to grow and change and make real differences in how you are in the world, right? So even if you are not loving the person that you are, like let's say that you're, 18 to 21, which most of you are, there's lots of space in, 0.51, between 0.51 and 1, which it would be completely set, to grow and change. And if we think about for those of us who are not in that age range, right? And you think back to when you were a young adult, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ago, and how different you are in comparison to that person, what that's representing is the non-bar part of this, right? The part of these that is flexibility, right? So we do have that opportunity to grow and change. Okay, so there's a video that you should go watch right now and then return to the lecture. Um, and do you absolutely have to do that right this second? I think it's a good idea to do it. But if you must, you can continue watching the lecture and then watch this later. It's definitely in Canvas. Pardon me. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about positive psychology. So this is a little bit new. This a little bit, something that we hear about now, and we didn't really hear about it 10 years ago. But, it is a direct offshoot of humanistic theories where basically, positive psychology studies the human strengths and our well-being and focuses on what we're good at and what we can use to help ourselves instead of what we are not doing right, you know? And so the structure of it is that we all have strengths, and there's groups of strengths, and those groups of strengths come together to make virtues. So in the picture here, we have this group of strengths that's curiosity, creativity, love of learning, and open-mindedness. And together, those strengths make the virtue wisdom. And they're basically all like that. So, you know, the virtues are listed here, and this is how they're described, but they all have different traits involved in them. So, that's, you know, a very quick and dirty uh, path through positive psychology. But if you think about it, this is a really helpful way to look at our personality and to look at our lives. Because, you know, when we look at it this way, it's all about our strengths and how we can leverage our strengths to help us get through life, you know, and you know, we don't all have all of these in spades, and nobody is expecting us to. It's the point is that we're all strong in some of these, right? And that we can use those to leverage us on the areas where we're less strong. Okay, so social cognitive. So what is this? It basically is, you know, the idea that our personality is about how we interacted with the social environment when we were little and how we continue to interact with it as we go forward in life. So the principles are basically that, and we're back now to you know, nature versus nurture, right? That the interaction between our behavior and our personal, you know, thoughts and feelings is and the environment is shaping what we do, right? It's not just our behavior is not just about what is going on around us, but is also about how we are on the inside. And I think we all know that that's the case, right? We're influenced by both of those things. So, self-efficacy is a really, really important concept to understand and also to believe in. You know, so not everybody believes in this, right? So, self-efficacy is the belief that we can succeed in accomplishing something that we want to succeed in. So, you know, this not everybody believes that, right? Like, not everybody believes that they have the power to succeed in any given area. And folks who are low on self-efficacy, they really have a struggle with motivation. They really have a struggle with controlling their emotions because, you know, if you feel like you're not in control of what's going on around you or in what you can do, then you're probably not going to feel like you can control yourself, right? And that goes for behavior as well. So folks with higher self-efficacy, um, they have a tendency to put in more effort and to be more persistent in the face of adversity, right? They tend to be more resilient than, you know, than other folks who have lower self-efficacy. And so they have a tendency to reach their goals more, right? If you feel like you are in control of how you attack whatever problem, then you're much more likely to be able to pivot when things go wrong. And, you know, you're much more likely to try to think of solutions, right? People who are low in self-efficacy have a tendency not to even try to think of solutions because, like, what's the point, right? If you're not going to, if you can't, pardon me, if you can't succeed because, it's all about the things that happen to you and not about anything that you do, then what's the point in trying to think of a solution because you're not going to get there anyway. So, right. So really what this falls into is the idea of internal locus of control and external locus of control. And there's a lot of words on this slide, but the bottom line is the internal locus of control basically says that you feel like you are in control of your life and you can change things when they need to be changed. In the external locus of control, you kind of feel like the universe happens to you. It's about how lucky you are, or whatever fate there is, or whatever people do around you or to you. And if folks with this external locus of control just have a tendency to feel like they're not in control, that they're kind of powerless, and they, also that they're not really accountable, right? Because it's about, you know, um whatever happened to them and not about what they do. And that happens both ways. Like even the good things that happen in their lives, that they don't attribute to them, right? They attribute to like, oh, that was just lucky, right? But also if bad things happen, they don't think it was about them, right? So it was about just bad luck, right? So it's really tough to go through life with an external locus of control. And, I really want you to think about how you can change your life if you have kind of an external locus of control, by working on turning it more inward. And that is not a simple thing to do. It is not easy to be somebody with an external locus of control and just like be like, oh, I never realized that. I never realized that like I would be better off if I thought that I was in control. It's not really about what you think. It's really like um it comes from how you were raised usually, right? It usually comes from actually being raised in a home where there is conditional positive regard, where the love is conditional on whether you behave the way that they want you to behave. Well, the control is coming external, right? It doesn't have anything to do with what you want or what you think you should do. Things just kind of happen to you and you have to comply. You're kind of a puppet, right? So as those folks grow up, it's really important to develop this internal locus of control so that you can get some control over your own life. And that is something that you can do a lot of different ways. You can go to therapy to work on this. There are lots of workbooks, and self-help books, and self-help books have kind of a bad rap, but they can be really helpful for stuff like this. They'll take you through exercises that you can do to help you build a deeper internal locus of control. And I would just encourage you to, if you are more externally, um, externally in the locus of control, that working on it will really improve your life, really and truly. And I yeah, I would definitely encourage you to talk to the people around you about like how they see this with you, and kind of take that and find a way to work on it. Right. So, the thing that I want to focus on this slide, I think we all sort of understand what a self-concept is and what self-esteem is. Those are parts of kind of our general understanding of how minds work. But the self-serving bias is a little bit different. It's a little bit deeper. And this is a really important distortion. Okay. So the self-serving distortion, the self-serving bias is a distortion that puts your successes to your internal self, right? So it's kind of a mix of internal locus of control and external locus of control. But when you fail, you blame external factors for that. So basically, it's like if you take an exam and you do a good job, you're like, it's, oh, because, I'm such a hard worker and I'm, so smart or whatever it is. But if you fail, that you're like, well, the teacher didn't teach me correctly, or, like it was too hard, right? It's never, I didn't study enough, right? It's never, I should have done more, or I didn't prepare correctly, or I didn't think it through, or I went too fast, or whatever it is, right? And the problem with this is that we never learn or grow, right? If we all do this to some extent, but if you if you're really deep into your self-serving bias, you will not succeed in school. You will not succeed in like the professional realm, because you're always, you know, when people look at you from the outside, they're always thinking like, oh, he's always making excuses, right? Like instead of taking responsibility for your failures, you just go, well, that's about somebody else. That's not about me. And it's hard to progress that way. Okay, so measuring personality. There are lots and lots of ways to measure personality. And they're in your homework. Well, not all of them, but there's a few in your homework. And I picked some that I felt, there's a lot of different ways, right? And I picked some that I felt would help you learn about yourself in ways that are useful. And I also picked ones that I think are kind of fun, right? So there's a lot of them. And if you want to test other parts of your personality, I encourage you to do that. So you should definitely go do that. But um, the we have not talked at all today about personality disorders, which is certainly a thing. And next week's lecture is going to be long enough. So I decided not to tack it on to psychological disorders, although they are psychological disorders. So there are some videos in Canvas on the lecture page that talk about the psychological, or I'm sorry, that talk about the personality disorders by Axis mainly. And you should definitely watch those in the order that they're presented. And they will help you kind of understand what those are. They are in your book, so they will appear in your quizzes and your exam. But I really think that these videos are a really good way to go through those. So just make sure that you do that. All right. So if you have any questions, or you want to check in about any of this stuff, by all means, let me know. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about personality disorders with you, and then to talk about psychological disorders with you next week. All right. Bye-bye.